Pursuit Grad, just to introduce ourselves, is a community for mentees and mentors. We're looking to empower, inspire, and educate one another through community. And we just are so aware that, especially right now, it's such a pivotal time to be in college, to be graduating. We so vividly remember the transition ourselves, and we thought amid COVID, this is an even more unique time, and there's bound to just be so many surprises and challenges ahead that it would be a great opportunity to connect people that have been through it and those that are going through it, and just really share thoughts, stories, questions on, how to best succeed in this new world of work, particularly in the communications, financial services, and media industries. So today I'm super excited to introduce Ryan Wallace as our first guest. He is the head of Operate Solutions at Unity Technologies, which is the world's leading platform for creating and developing interactive 3D real-time content. And, just to give you a little bit of background, Ryan and I, first of all, both went to Syracuse University, Newhouse, and then we both worked at the same company for several years together. And when we first met, it was really our love of Syracuse that really brought us closest together. We were not even assigned to work on anything, but once we found out we both went to Syracuse, it was, a relationship that just fit like a glove. And then we both love tech and media, and it's just, and he's just been so great. He helped actually even in founding Pursuit PR. He was one of those few people that we had confided in that we were starting, and he gave us all sorts of advice. So we're just so happy to have you.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Rachel.
So to kick it off, just thought, if you could just take us back in time to what it was like when you graduated, that would be super interesting, and what your mindset was and what it was like for you at the time.
Yeah. So I graduated in May of 2002. Unlike the pandemic, the job prospects were probably a little bit greater, but it wasn't all too dissimilar to, I think, what a lot of grads are facing right now. In 2002, we were coming right off of the first .com crash. We had Giuliani as our speaker that year, and I'll never forget at the main Syracuse convocation that the message delivered to all of our parents. Actually, I think it was Mother's Day weekend too, talk about timing, and all of our parents in the audience. And the message was, I'm sorry that, you've worked so hard and spent so much on this education, but the job prospects right now are kind of tough. And I don't really think that's too dissimilar from where, especially anybody within the Newhouse network is looking to get into media and TV today. Now, the flip side of that, though, is that I think today there's probably more of a dearth of need for creative content, news. So, and if TRF is still around, but definitely PR and advertising. I think a lot of people have heard the stories of the pent up consumer demand that we're sort of sitting on as we go back to normal and the world starts to open up. So I think that, in the next 2 to 3 months, you're going to see a big change for this year's graduating seniors coming on. For me, it was an opportunity to find a job, and I mean any job at that point in time. I actually ended up starting my career in healthcare in Albany with the Healthcare Association for New York State, working under the Chief Communications Officer's office and working on a hospital upgrade with databases. So I know we'll get into this a little bit later, but for me, it was kind of a foray into what became a very longstanding tech PR firm.
Yes. PR career. Yes, and you've certainly had an amazing career: healthcare, consumer tech, enterprise tech, in-house, agency. You're now in-house at, a major developer of, real-time content. So, tell us a little bit about, what your goals were really at the time and how they might have evolved throughout your career.
Totally. So, I would probably say that my first rooted job, even after Haney's, was in the entertainment industry. I mean, if anybody ever remembers the HBO show Entourage, I really thought that I wanted to get involved and be the next Ari Gold. There was something, working in entertainment, it was fast paced, it was exciting, it was relevant, and people knew what you were talking about in terms of content. And that job actually came to me through Newhouse contacts. They were actually friends of mine that were down in the city at the time. And they had completed a 3-month internship that they had started right after we graduated. And they got promoted into a coordinator role and gave me a call and say, hey, look, I'm trying to backfill this. Do you want to come in and work, with me? And it's very interesting because these were the same friends that you saw in class every day, you saw on Marshall Street on the weekends. And, here we are 20 years down the road, no longer working with one another, but we found a way to bring that Syracuse experience into that first job. So for me, I will say it was networking led to that first opportunity. And in terms of goals, I mean, it was the idea of, I wanted to try to put all of the skill set that I had learned at Syracuse to work. What I can tell you from this vantage point today is that take those first 10 years to really figure out which of those goals really stick with you and resonate. Not all of them will, not all of them do, but for me, it was an opportunity to try as many things as I could to figure out exactly where, what I was passionate about and what makes me want to get up and do this job every day.
Yeah, that's a great point. I always tell people that I originally went to Syracuse to be a broadcast journalist, and I was going to be a news anchor, bilingual with Spanish, and all of this good stuff, which I had, focused on for my entire high school career. But then halfway through, I was standing in the quad in the freezing cold for another Sunday by myself with this tripod, and I just realized I didn't like it, and it was really hard to accept that your goals really do change. And I'm so glad I had that experience early on, that it's okay to pivot.
Yep, absolutely. For me, I think it was the connective tissue. You had entertainment into consumer technology. Consumer technology gave way to B2B technology. I like to joke that the B2B tech for me was definitely the rabbit hole moment. And that sort of led to everything from Juniper Networks to Polycom as clients, scaling up from one of the largest consumer lifestyle firms to go into arguably one of the largest global tech firms at the time, to working really in deep global tech with companies like Google and SAP. And then our experience working together, where for me, it was more about the business of the business and learning how to build a practice at NWW, to going in-house and taking everything I learned in tech to NRG, where it was all about renewable energy and creating a more sustainable future. And then actually, just like you, and this is where I think our paths crossed heavily again, was, like you've had the benefit of building a firm from the ground up. I was able to do that underneath somebody else's shingle in my endeavor before Unity, but then the opportunity with Unity really spoke to me. It was an opportunity to take what I loved about ad tech and all of the B2B cloud experience that I had, and knowing the consumer end engagement with gaming and entertainment that I started in. And for me, this really felt like a nice red thread sewing everything up together. So for my goals today, that's very important for me, where I can look back and say, out of 20 years of what I've been doing, this job is really harnessing or utilizing the top skills that I learned across everything.
Yeah, it's the culmination, and it's the category itself of gaming and just interactive entertainment is really exploding right now. Yep,
absolutely. Let's see. So, it's interesting. I think you had asked me when we were laying this out, what side of the house do I feel like I fit better on, right? Is it the in-house versus the agency side? For the folks that are listening that are looking to get into our field, I will hands down still to this day say that going agency first was probably the best decision that I ever made. That idea of finding what it is that you want to be working on, what you want to be a part of. An agency is going to give you anywhere between 3 to 5 opportunities in terms of clients that have different products, services, focuses, needs that are going to effectively broaden your entire palette of what you're going to like, what you're going to learn, what you're going to be good at. Going in-house is great once you sort of know those focuses that you like, especially if you can find a role that really brings you into focus of what you're good at, where you can make an impact. But I would not be where I am today. And Rach, I would pose the same question to you. If we didn't have the agency experiences that we did to learn, different ways of approaching different media, especially on the PR side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I worked primarily at agencies. I was lucky that a client did essentially hire me for an in-house role while starting Pursuit as one of the earlier clients. So I actually got a little flavor of that, which was really cool. But yeah, just I think, you know, it was a combination of sticking with it and also, you know, making moves that worked. So my first job I was at for 3 years, which is actually considered a fairly long time out of college. And I was there because I really liked it. And I felt I was having upward mobility. I thought I was learning and it was good. And I think there's this tendency of people to have this itch they want to scratch. It's like they're chasing something, that they have something already right in front of you. And it's tough to distinguish, you know, should I stay? Should I go? How long to stay? And it's really just about figuring out, am I learning? Am I growing? Am I meeting new people? Am I challenged? Am I rewarded? If the answers are yes, you're going to want to stay. Once the answers become no, obviously you're going to have to think about it and go with your gut. So I think for me, it was like I had a couple experiences, but I also stayed long enough that I actually built really good relationships with clients, colleagues, and just people that came in and out of the organization.
I'll agree with that. I also think that, you know, I look back before I really got heavily into tech, Caplo, which is a consumer lifestyle firm in the city. That's where we had worked on Skype. We were part of the team that brought Skype out of the UK into the US market at the time. And, you know, the rest of that company was focused on beauty and lifestyle in particular. Right. And, you know, there was a time when both Skype and eBay were changing agencies. And I know that they would have loved to have me stay, but the owner of that company actually said, look, we know your passion is in tech. This is where you have to follow and go, because this is, you know, you just come alive at it. Those are the types of companies that you want to work for too, right? Especially when you can find founders that will stand behind letting people do their best work. That's probably the number one thing to be looking for.
Yeah, and on that note, when people are interviewing right now, they're being interviewed, but how can they figure out if it's the best fit for them?
I think the number one thing that I will say now, that I wish I knew now, that I wish I had known then, is don't be afraid to ask questions back. You know, I will say that when I was in the shoes of some of our listeners, I think it was more that I want a job. I will start at any job, you know, get my foot in the door, work my way up. But I was not as vocal about finding out more about the firms that I was working for. You know, what type more of clients do they have? What does the growth track look like? Whereas today, and I have to say, I've been blessed to have been interviewing some very smart candidates that are coming right out of school. They know the types of companies that they want to be working for. They understand that there are either public practices or public endeavors that these companies have been involved with that matter to them in terms of what the company's public perception happens to be. And it's everything from diversity in the workplace to transparency on compensation. And I would say that, you know, it sounds scary that I'm going to be telling you to go out and actually ask those questions and have those conversations, but absolutely do. I think that shows me interviewing people is that you have done your due diligence to know that if it's not a public facing statement on a company's website, that you actually want to know more. You're looking for some place that is going to treat you as well as you are going to treat it with regard to, if you're going to show up every day to give your all, you want to know for sure that you're there with a company that's meeting you in the middle in terms of their ethics, their morals, and their commitment to employees. You know, so definitely ask more questions than what you're used to. I would say the other thing is on the fact that it's an interview being a two-way street. You know, don't be afraid to ask your interviewees what some of the challenges that they've had in the past year. You know, when you get 2 to 3 years into your role and you're going to make a switch someplace, one of the questions that I like to ask in that role is, well, what's the biggest challenge that you had and what's a way that you problem solved it? If you turn that question on its head and you bring it back to the account executive or the senior account executive or whomever you're going to be interviewing with, you know, what I tend to find is you're going to understand the types of problems that you're going to be faced with from a client perspective. And building on that, you're also going to understand exactly what the appetite is for creativity, for risk, for trying new strategies in the firm that you're looking for. So you have firms out there that, you know, really break down the door on being hyper creative and taking risks and are willing to be that bold. I've definitely worked for the firms that have been probably a little bit more conservative with regard to what the appetite is and what the client's appetites are. But you really get to figure out sort of where you're really going to be able to make an impact and maybe try some new things if that's really in the ilk of what you're looking to do in terms of the industry.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And I think they all connect to the concept of, you know, just like knowing who you are and what you stand for and what's going to be good, you know, good, because what's good for you is going to be good for the company you're working with too. It's in everyone's best interest for it to work out well, because of course a company's investing in you. They don't want you to leave. They want you to stay and contribute. So you want to make sure that everyone feels like this is going to be a good match. And I think also one of two things that you could do is just ask who might be your manager, and just think, do I think this person seems like someone I might feel comfortable with? And also ask them what their interests are. You know, what do they do for fun? You know, ask them where they're from. Just try to get to know people, because it can seem somewhat intimidating that they're in the driver's seat interviewing you, but really everyone's just a person. And it's great to just get to know people, because once you get to know people, it makes the work itself much more enjoyable. And also, if you do experience a challenge, you know each other, and you have each other's best interests at heart. So it makes it easier to communicate. Just something that when we worked together, it was always so smooth because we knew each other, we respected each other. So if we had questions or feedback, we can just share it without any issue.
100%. It's actually something I like about my current role at Unity. We have something that we like to call fierce feedback, which is not as aggressive as it sounds in title, but it is that transparency in the culture of why I think we are a get you know what done type of culture at work. It's just everybody's marching toward one goal, whether that is on the product side or the revenue side or more. And if you can take the time, give the feedback, and then bring your team forward with you, that's really what makes a difference, at least for where I am right now. Yeah.
And what are some of the values that Unity has as a company?
I will say it boils down into 4 in particular. And actually it's funny because a lot of this is really part of what my personal management style was at Pan and why it meshed so well. So the first is that it's users first, right? I think the best lesson that I can give to anybody that's on this call, and Rach, I remember we used to talk about this as well, is we are in a client service industry. And if somebody tells you that PR is different than waiting tables in terms of like what the client service element of that is, they are absolutely wrong. We are there on agency side to serve our clients, to help our clients' reputations and help them look good, which in turn makes the agency look good. And then for us at Unity, it's all about users first. What are we doing in terms of making sure that it is for the benefit of our customers, not us ourselves, not the company's own bravado. It really comes down to users. The second is that the best ideas win. It's all ideas count on the ground, but really if you were to have a thoughtful dialect on all of the options that a team in a brainstorm, for example, were to throw out, we all coalesce behind what we know are the best ones that are best, not just for the business, but again, for those users. We are a goal bold culture as well. So we are not afraid to push the envelope, which, for me is a very different thing in the B2B world, right? I mean, B2B sales and B2B PR is very much a conservative play. And then the last one is probably the most important one, which is in it together, right? We all recognize that we are doing something for the common goal, the common good, what it is that we are moving toward. I mean, our main ethos is that we believe the world is a better place with more creators in it. So if you are able to know that and get toward that goal, and you're making the decision for those creators and those users, everything else seems to fall in place.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And how are you at Unity managing the workforce, virtual, hybrid, and what are some advice you might have for new grads to get the most out of, whether it's fully remote or hybrid, this new way of working, this new world of work?
And in terms of what's going to happen when we go back to work, we are an organization that is actually allowing people to have discussions with their managers. If you've been able to prove that you are an effective at-home worker, that is great. I can tell you I have colleagues that are saying, I want to get out of the house. I want the kids to go back to school. I want to go to my desk and I want to leave the job there and come home at the end of the day. And I think you're going to see that hybrid model continue for quite some time. I don't think it's going to be an either or. It's going to be an and model for a lot of people.
Yeah, and we've just found it so interesting because, as you know, Pursuit PR has been operating a virtual workforce for 4 years now. Partially because of our founding and the fact that, we wanted flexibility just for our own selves. And then also because with our specialists, they're more seasoned and they also want the flexibility. People like that they could travel, work wherever they want. There's no one staring at you in terms of when you're clocking in and clocking out. But I would say the one thing that really stands, whether you're independent contractor, full-time, in-house, agency, whatever sector, is accountability. That you have to still be accountable. It's not anything goes. You want to show up, do a good job, get your work done. And it seems that, we're encouraged that despite all the tragedies of COVID, it's essentially awakened in corporate America that it's okay. You don't have to be staring at your employee, micromanaging them. It's okay if they want to eat dinner at a normal time and maybe check in later if they need to. It's okay as long as everyone's accountable. And like I said, a person that has a full life, they'll be able to best contribute.
I'll back that up with two. I will say, at least from my perspective as well, I think the best managers, if you are finding yourself going into the workforce in a remote position, the best managers are going to be the ones that will actually give you the time, not just scheduled on your calendar, but when you want it and when you need it. So I have two people that started recently that aren't on my team directly. They work on complementary teams to the communications team. And you can tell that they're sort of clamoring for that in-office, in-person experience. And so there are days where all of a sudden I will have a random 45-minute catch up here or a 10-minute, just wanted to see how you were doing. They want that water cooler interaction. So, again, I think that goes back into some of the questions where if anybody that's on the call is looking and interviewing and they want to know exactly what type of attention they're going to get if they are kind of going into the remote option before they could get into that more traditional model, right? Where you're going to learn all the players, face-to-face how things work, which departments happen to be where, but don't be afraid to ask for that extra time. People are willing to give it to you. Don't think you're being needy or asking too much. I am a massive believer that the more time you can give people in the onset is going to set them up for success in the longer run with understanding people and process.
Yeah, and just having a conversation. What's the best way? What's the best frequency? How do I reach you? Am I calling you? Am I scheduling something? Am I video? I also think something too is having a conversation on if it's video or audio seems to go over well, both with team members and clients and colleagues, because some people we deal with, we find they've been on so many video calls that they're just stoked to take a walk and talk with us and not have to be on a video. Others, when it's a more scheduled call, they want to do video, but that balance that a lot of people have a hard time finding is, just the best platform, the best way. There's so many ways to connect, but making sure everyone, is doing it in a way that's manageable for them. So I think maybe, I have more questions, but I'll just open it up in case anyone in the audience wants, and then I can always close out with some more of my own. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
We've got one.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. I was just wondering what you thought the big differences were between starting at an agency versus starting in-house.
Yeah. I mean, look, they both have their advantages and they both have their drawbacks. For me, it was, the advantages of agency, again, are diversity in the client base. I think that it also provides more opportunity for if there's a piece of business that you get excited about that you're not currently working on, you have the ability to partner with biz dev and go out and get that, right? So for me, in my last agency side gig, it was very much, I wanted to see more ad tech and more AI. So I went out and I got those pieces of business. So I had them as something I looked forward to and working on. When you're in-house, you're really more at the mercy of product development and engineering. I'll also say, like, another interesting dilemma at times is how creative you actually can be when you're in-house. Now, again, thankfully, I've found a role that doesn't really paint you into a box in the way that traditional in-house roles can. But I would say 90% of them, when you go in-house, will say, here are your four walls. This is what, in my case, this is what PR and communications is responsible for. You can work cross-functionally with your marketing and your product partners and your events teams and your social teams and your community teams. But everybody has their own defined lawn, as if it were, and you are only to stay on yours. Whereas on the agency side, there's so much more of that work that you are responsible for doing on your own. So I think, again, I look at it as best decision that I ever made was to stay agency as long as I did, because I think it just really diversified the skill set that I'm exposed to. Once you're in-house, there's an opportunity to move around. You could move to a different department. I could move to marketing if I wanted to, but the ability to really orchestrate across all of the functions of the marketing spectrum that you get from an agency side does not exist in-house.
Awesome answer. I appreciate it so much. But I was also wondering, how do I know when an employer is right for me, my skill sets, my ambitions, everything I want?
The answer I'm not supposed to say is whatever the packages that they put together for you from there. But no, it really comes down to, is it what you want to be working on? The reason that I ended up at Unity was actually not all of the Operate Solutions portfolio. It was the monetization offerings. And I had, prior to that, been running point on probably 80% of the digital ad tech ecosystem based in New York over the last 10 years. I've touched one, if not all, of the major players in that aspect. So for me, the job was completely to my strengths and really, really focused on the heart of the area of the business that I absolutely loved the most. So for me, that was the decision to go in-house. Was I have a chance to really focus on that one area of business that makes me the happiest and where I really know that I can step up to the plate and hit a grand slam every time. The challenge, though, I will say too, is don't be afraid if you want to step out of your comfort zone. I will say that sometimes that is the biggest excitement that you can get if you're going to go in-house or even to agency. And the example I'll give to that is, when I took the position with NRG, I had no idea I would be getting involved with internal communications. So like company communications on the inside. And, we had a workforce of 10,000 people, not all of whom had access to a laptop or a computer on the job. So you were thinking through multi-format, even down to radio broadcasting, like terrestrial radio broadcasting, company-wide updates from the CEO for guys that were on or at power plants in Texas or Arizona or wherever they happen to be. And the attraction to go to that company was that the sale was, what did we call it? There was no Apple, Amazon, Google, or Facebook of the energy industry. And we were building a 21st century economy on a system of wires and poles. And when you looked at the advances in the rest of the world and the rest of tech, we knew we could bring that change into the energy industry. So the ability to take everything that I had learned previously and really disrupt a new industry, I think that was the exciting and simultaneously the fear factor for it. But what I'll always contribute is, or I'll always attribute as the number one thing that I left that job with, Matt, was being able to scale an internal communications function up to 10,000 people, right? And so that wasn't something that I thought I was going to get, and was pretty surprised.
Is there any advice you would go back and give yourself if you were a PR professional starting your career today?
Oh God, everything. I can tell you the number one mistake I think a lot of people make is they're like, I know how to pitch media, I'm good. And if you think it's just media pitching today, I mean, there's definitely a rude awakening. I think that's waiting there for people. So I think that if you've had the opportunity to, and I'm going to use tech as this example, Matt, developer communications. Are you working directly with the people that take your clients' products and build new exciting things? Are you doing community forum management? Like how long have you spent in Reddit, not just reading it, but like actually managing conversations? How are you ensuring that social is more than a post that points back to a blog or a press release, that there is a full-on dialogue and voice that's there? Have you mastered that? Obviously within writing, and your writing is your short form for the press release. It's a long form beyond a blog. Is it going into the depths of white papers? Have you dabbled in analyst relations at all? Have you had executive communications, specific executive communications, where you're working with a C-level, you're building a platform out for them? It is the full earned, owned, paid element in terms of where you're working with events on sponsorship or at their company's own event, and what you're helping to build from a script writing perspective for a keynote or a panel presentation. If you've only been exposed to, this is the product release that's coming up and I need you to get media on it, I would say stay agency side and look for the opportunities to learn a multifaceted approach, because then when you go internal, and it's much harder and slower to move up the ladder when you go in-house, but when you go internally, make sure that you have an opportunity to really showcase everything that you could have learned at the agency. So stay agency as long as you can to learn as much as you can, and you're going to be more valuable when you're ready to go in-house.
Yeah, and something that you're really hitting on is just, I think, humility and curiosity. Those are two really important traits in really any field, especially when you're starting out, but actually the whole way through. Knowing, still where we both are at our careers, that there's still more for us to learn. We have, that's why that's what makes things interesting. So knowing what you know, but also having an interest in what you don't know and being willing to ask for help, which is really one of the reasons we wanted to create this community, is to connect people with mentors that maybe you're not getting in the office, or maybe you just don't feel comfortable with the people at your company. That you need to have mentors, and you need to also have the ability to self-reflect, because throughout your career, I know personally you're going to get feedback, both positive and negative. And it's really what you do with it that can make all the difference in your growth.
100%, 100%. Well, in terms of what size agency would I start at, again, I've only worked for one of the big agencies once, Matt, and you very much get lost as a number. You are tied to revenue directly, is what that comes down to. For me, I think that the smaller agencies that have a focus, that know what their DNA is in terms of what their strengths are, always outperform those bigger agencies, because they are going to give you not just more attention, but ultimately they are going to bring in the client base that continues to keep you excited. They realize that there can't just be a free-for-all on like, yep, we work on everything from A to Z. They're not everything to everybody. They know that they are there for a specific mission and purpose, and they are more inclined to take employee feedback in to consideration of knowing, can we win this? Will we be successful at this? Will people be excited to want to work on this? if I hadn't had at least 4 experiences in my career with agencies that were probably 75 people and under, I definitely would have not gotten the, like I was just saying in the previous answer, I wouldn't have gotten the exposure to the skill set that I had today. And I probably wouldn't have had the diversity of being able to work on all of the exciting things that I've worked on in my career to this point. So for me, I would say it's, don't be afraid of the smaller agencies at all, because you're likely going to get deeper attention, better lessons, more on the job skill training than you would if you're just thrown into the fray and expected to, to move on some of the larger accounts that happen to be out there.
Agree. And I would also say you would also get more client exposure, more likely.
Correct.
Because people want you to be able to contribute as much as possible, because if there's less people, then there's actually more opportunity, and also just more interest in growth. If the company has more room to grow, there's more upside. So they're looking for people that can contribute. So I'm just going to pause for 1 second. I noticed some new people joined. Just to reintroduce, this is Pursuit Grad. It's meant to be a community for mentors and mentees. Ryan Wallace is joining us today. He's the head of PR Operate Solutions, AI and machine learning at Unity Technologies, and that is a leader in interactive real-time 3D content. So if anyone has any other questions, all you have to do is go to the bottom right hand of your screen where there's a little hand with a little notepad behind it, and just click on that, and that will alert me, and I will unmute you and give you the opportunity to speak. Or if you're already in the room as a speaker now, you can just unmute, obviously, Matt or Brendan, if you had anything else you want to ask. Okay.
Energy. First thing, I mean, especially over Zoom, literally wake up and be prepared for it. I mean, I've run the gambit of interviewing folks recently where there was one person, I kid you not, that looked like they literally just sort of fell out of bed. It was completely unprepared, blank staring at the screen, and you really felt like you were having to reach in and pull the answers out of them. So, this sounds so rudimentary, but like a good night's sleep and a really big cup of coffee go a long way in the morning. Read, be prepared about it. Have the questions. Nobody's expecting you to come to that interview as an expert on the topics that are there. If you come knowing less about our business, but ask the questions where we can explain the business to you, that tells me you're just as motivated as if you had stayed up all night asking, or reading everything that you could so that you felt like you were the most prepared. It's a balance, but again, I go back to that ask the questions, right? The more that you can know about us, what direction is the company going on X topic? I've read a lot about this competitor. How do you feel about what their impact has been in the marketplace? Start that dialogue to show that you're hungry for being involved. That will carry you farther than sitting down and regurgitating my S1 or my most recent earnings reports or product press releases that are out there.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because when we interview people and they ask questions, everything you said applies. And then it's also that in our profession in particular, we actually have to ask a lot of questions to be successful. So we need to be able to pull out information from our clients, and you have your own clients internally, the different executives that you work with. They're not going to hand things to you, or they might say, this is really interesting, we should do a press release, but it might not be the right thing, right? So they might offer some information, but others, they're just sitting on all this information that they don't even realize is relevant to the marketplace. And it's our job as communications professionals to probe and really dig in and really get that unfiltered information so that we have everything we need to know, and then we can best figure out how to portray it and message it. But we have to be able to ask the right questions about what's the media going to want to know, what are investors going to want to know, what do clients need to know, what do employees need to know, putting ourselves in multiple shoes. All right. So if anyone else has any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. All right. If you think of something along the way, you can just raise your hand. I'm just going to ask a few closing questions. One is, Ryan, you're very, very active outside of even your professional career, which has been very, very dynamic. So recently you volunteered locally in Hudson Valley to strengthen the communications to encourage vaccinations locally in Hudson, New York. And you've also applied to run for city council unopposed on the Democratic ticket. And you sound like you have some really interesting plans for the community. And then for more than 7 years, you've been the communications director and mentor for the New York Fashion Lab, which is an organization you actually helped to get off the ground. So you've been very busy, but you have a full life, friends, family, hobbies. How do you find ways to balance your time?
Well, COVID really helped put more time back on the focus on the work stuff since I couldn't go anywhere. But
Right.
It's, look, all of these things are things that I love to do, right? And I will say that, at my age and after my years of experience, I know that who I am as a person is about as much as I can give back when and where possible. So that really begat New York Fashion Tech Lab, right? And making sure that that time was donated pro bono. I'm still on there as a mentor. The clinic here was all about the fact that, and you hear a lot of this today, right? There's a propensity of people that absolutely wanted to be able to get vaccinated. And I could tell you 3 months ago that we were going to hit this wall that we've hit now where there's hesitancy. And hesitancy is only broken through communication and better understanding and more. And, if we are to get back to, normal, and I'll use that in quotations, a lot of that comes down to good communication and having somebody who can sit down with people, learn the material, right? So, it's reading everything that the New England Journal of Medicine or the CDC puts out, and then being able to digest that into something that you can have a conversation with, your grandmother about, somebody who doesn't have a medical degree or background. So for me, the way to find the balance is that these are all things that I love to do.
Right.
So that you find a natural time for it. I will say probably the better way for me to answer this question though, is I put blocks on my schedule that are just 2-hour blocks at least every day that are just me time, whether that is for me to work out, go for a walk, to be completely disconnected and unplugged from everything. You have to make sure that you put the barriers there. You cannot be a fully yes person all the time. That is what very quickly leads to burnout. I know one of the questions you have on here is what advice would I give to my 22-year-old self? That would probably be it, which is do not say yes to everything. You will back yourself into a corner with time, and you will not be too happy with it. So make sure that you are protecting your time for your own mental health in that aspect.
Yeah, I agree. I like to block out time too. I also find it's helpful for yourself. And I also find it's helpful actually in general to block out time for tasks too, because then you can manage it right. Like I know this is going to take me an hour. This is going to take me 2 hours or whatever, so that you can actually look at your day and see how you're going to accomplish things. It helps when you get overwhelmed too, because if you get overwhelmed and you actually think about how long things will take you, it might be easier for you to digest what's on your plate. And then you start to prioritize if anything's spilling over.
Absolutely.
So, yes, I was going to ask you the 22-year-old self question next. I would say, something that I also wanted to touch on that you mentioned, you were talking about with the vaccination clinic, that you needed to learn the material from the CDC and other sources and share it. And just thought that I wanted to point that out because as communications professionals in particular, it is heavily our responsibility to take on our whatever our subject matter is, our client at the time, as if it were our own. As if you were running the vaccination clinic and it's your baby, and you need to know it inside and out, because if you're the representative for the company and or you're creating all the communications materials, you have to know your stuff.
That's correct.
And so that's just something I wanted to highlight, that, knowing the business and knowing your subject matter is just so important, from the interview to the actual day-to-day work. So to close it out, is there anything that you think new grads, that you didn't know then that you wish you did outside of burnout, that new grads might appreciate knowing going in?
Oh, I mean, the easiest thing is that, it'll all work out. It's so easier said than done, in hindsight, but don't be afraid of change. Right. And I will say that whether that is a road bump in your career or, I think, one of the best surprises that I had in terms of agencies that I switched between at one point in time, I had left a very comfortable job to go and work for a specific account at one agency. And the comfortable job had even allowed me to have some extra time. They're like, hey, it's the holidays. Why don't you take an extra week off? We'll pay you through. I was like, wow, super generous. This is great. I get to the next job, and the day that I started, they told me, they're like, well, while you were in transition between the two, that client that you came to work on had actually resigned on us. And, so we're going to find something new for you to work on. So you're going to have all types of curveballs thrown at you. And it really comes down to roll with the punches. And, the best thing I can say is that, in our industry, the opportunities remain plentiful, right? I think that as long as, whether it's tech, whether it's consumer products, whether it's news media, I mean, everything is moving ahead at lightning speed right now. So the need for clear, concise communications professionals has never been more needed than ever. So I think if you are a PR grad, I mean, I would say if it's anything under the Newhouse umbrella, there will always be a need for us. So don't worry that if you're at a point where you feel like opportunities are few and far between, give it time, they will come.
That is extremely encouraging. So unless anyone has any last burning questions, I think we covered everything today. So thank you everyone who joined. Feel free to follow up with myself or Ryan, and you can always connect after the fact as well. That's the point of this too. And we did videotape this, so we'll be producing a video with some highlights that we'll send out shortly thereafter.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Rachel. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining our first Clubhouse. We'll be doing this again on June 3rd.